This is the check that United States of America paid to Russia for the deed of Alaska, and it was a bargain at $7.2 million in 1867. But now,
a Russian lawmaker has reportedly demanded America return the entire state of Alaska amid U.S.-led sanctions of his country.
I speak for all of us in the U.S. government to say that certainly he is not getting it back.
We cannot sell Alaska back to Russia. It is not possible.
Russia sold Alaska to the US, but now they want a refund. Unfortunately for Putin and his friends, the receipt for that transaction expired over 150 years ago.
For our part, we suggest that it is better to give Alaska back to us.
do you know what they call Alaska? Ice Crimea. Someday, it will return to its native shores. What if we leave then in the Aleutian Islands? Enter Alaska, and they get surrounded? That's a good idea.
But are we accustomed to returning what is ours, and will always do so? So in principle, the $7.2 million that Alaska was sold for is not much money that we cannot find it. And we could suggest to our American partners that they consider returning Alaska.
Then California have to go back to Mexico. Fort Ross to its native places. Alaska will go home too. And Hawaii. No, I think borders should be drawn like this. Arizona, Nebraska, or like that, yes. And we'll say, look, there's also Alaska. Alaska's yours, right? And a bit of California. It's all clear with Alaska. There is a state borders Oregon, Baja, California.
Now regarding border security, especially with unfriendly countries, Americans are now very concerned that the Russians are gonging to attack Alaska. How so? But we have to this, by the way, is one of the most serious threats to the United States of America.
I want Russian Empire with Alaska, Hawaii, California, Finland, and Poland. Although Poland and Finland are so stinky, I'm not sure, to be honest. By the way, I agree with those who say that Russia occupies unfairly. Yes, we need to that much more. Yes, we need to return much more historical lands, restore historical fairness. Definitely. As for fairness, let's take Alaska, and they will give the rest themselves. Of course, Alaska too.
We'll take care of our Alaska. It's not up to U.S. Department of State to decide whether Russia gets the state or not. It's up to a Russian referendum.
Russian politicians are stirring chaos in Moscow. They are demanding that Alaska, America's largest state, packed with oil and military bases, be returned to them because it's theirs. But here's the twist. Russia didn't lose it in a war. They sold it in a cheap deal that would make a pawn shop owner proud. Now, with Trump and Putin set to meet in Alaska soon to discuss Ukraine, old grudges are resurfacing, threatening to spark conflict. So let's dive into this Alaska issue and try to understand what's driving the bitterness in Moscow. They're not just talking about maps, they're talking about rewriting history. And if you think the world needs to understand why that's dangerous, well then hit like and subscribe. Your support helps push this truth beyond the algorithm and past the propaganda. Let's start with the recent buzz. From 2023 to 2025, a wave of Russian voices, including politicians, pundits, and propagandists, have revived the fantasy of reclaiming Alaska. It began when the US froze billions in Russian assets abroad. In response, a lawmaker close to Putin floated the idea that Moscow should reconsider taking Alaska. The comment was vague, but it struck a nerve. Then came January of 2024. Putin signed a decree to investigate old Russian properties overseas. While the Kremlin didn't name Alaska, some in the media ran wild with speculation. State TV hosts began casually referring to Alaska as ours, weaving it into segments on Western aggression. Dmitry Medvedev, never shy about stirring the pot, joked online that war might be inevitable if the US didn't return it. Though his tone was sarcastic, the message was unmistakable. By mid-2024, the message had escalated. More propagandists echoed the claim, framing Alaska as a symbol of Western theft and Russian victimhood. In July, Vladimir Solovyov, one of Putin's most loyal media figures, called for Alaska's return outright. He claimed the 1867 sale was illegitimate, forced under duress, and that Russia had a historic right to the land. The narrative gained traction heading into 2025. It is especially important now with the Trump-Putin summit scheduled in Alaska. Russian nationalists fixated on the location, calling it a former Russian territory. They even began suggesting that the meeting itself was symbolic of unfinished business. Far-right groups since chimed in, blending talk of diplomacy with veiled threats of reclamation. Now, just to be clear, this isn't coming from the top levels of government, at least not directly, and not yet. Back in 2014, Vladimir Putin even dismissed the idea of reclaiming Alaska with a smirk, saying it's too cold and not worth the effort. It was a moment of calculated humor, but also a signal. Alaska isn't a strategic priority, yet that hasn't stopped nationalist voices from resurrecting the idea, turning it into a symbol of wounded pride and imperial nostalgia. This isn't about geography, it's about psychology. In Russia, where state-controlled media dominates the narrative, even random ideas can gain traction pretty fast. The idea of Alaska as Russian taps into a deeper emotional current. It revives the lingering resentment over the Soviet Union's collapse, and the perceived loss of global stature as Russia is now seen as a failing nation. Right now, public relations even within Russia are mixed. Some Russians roll their eyes, treating it as a joke. Others feel a surge of patriotism, imagining a reversal of history. A 2024 poll found that roughly 20% of Russians supported the idea of reclaiming Alaska. However, most rank it far below pressing concerns like, inflation, sanctions, the war in Ukraine. Still, the idea keeps resurfacing, especially online, where memes and slogans blur the line between irony and ideology. In several cities, posters have appeared bearing the phrase, "Alaska is Russian."
The man who posted this photo claims to have seen multiple billboards like this one pop up around the city of Krasnoyarsk in Siberia.
They're not state-issued, but they reflect a mood, a symbolic push to rewrite the past, or at least reframe it. In the end, it's not about Alaska. It's about identity, about reclaiming something intangible, pride, power, and the myth of a Russia that never lost. But here's the reality. These statements are political theater. They're designed to provoke, distract, and rally domestic support. Because behind this movement, Russia knows the truth. It can't afford to act on these fantasies for several reasons. Under today's international law, the dream of Russia somehow taking Alaska back is about as far-fetched as Canada reclaiming Maine. For starters, the 1867 treaty that transferred Alaska from Russia to the US is still valid. Treaties are binding documents under international law, and this one isn't just a dusty historical artifact. It is recognized as legitimate by both countries. Then there's the United Nations Charter, especially Article 2, which is crystal clear about one thing. No country is allowed to threaten or use force to alter another country's borders. Once territory is legally transferred through a recognized treaty, and both sides acknowledge it, it's a done deal. The case is closed unless both parties voluntarily renegotiate, which, let's be honest, that's not going to happen here. Now, like I said in the beginning, there is no refund about to happen. And even if Russia were to challenge the treaty's legitimacy, there's no legal loophole to exploit. The US has exercised undisputed sovereignty over Alaska for more than 150 years. That's a concept in law called acquisitive prescription. Basically, if you've administered, governed, and defended a territory for generations without challenge from the original owner, your claim becomes ironclad. Put simply, the legal door isn't just closed, it's welded shut, padlocked, and then buried under some concrete bunker. And even if Russia tries to use not-so-legal methods as it has done to Ukraine, its chances with the US go from bad to worse. Put simply, Alaska is not Crimea. It's not a disputed border zone or a breakaway republic. It's sovereign US territory, protected by the full weight of American military might. Keep in mind that the US has a defense budget that is roughly 7 times larger than Russia's, and this has been the case for quite a while. Militarily speaking, Russia is outclassed in ways it can't even dream of. Any attempt to challenge that, rhetorically or otherwise, would invite a response Russia is in no position to handle. The war in Ukraine has already exposed the limits of Russian force. Its military is strained, its economy is battered by sanctions, and its global standing diminished. Opening a confrontation with the United States over Alaska would be suicidal. Washington wouldn't hesitate. As a matter of fact, it would jump on the opportunity to set an example. Unlike Ukraine, where support is indirect, Alaska, that's home turf, baby. Any threat would be met with overwhelming force, and Russia knows it. That's why these calls to take back Alaska remain just noise. They serve a domestic purpose, to stir pride, deflect criticism, and paint the West as the villain. But they have no basis in law, no support in diplomacy, and no chance in reality. Alaska isn't just American, it's untouchable. And every time Russian media tries to say otherwise, It only highlights how far Moscow has fallen from the empire it once was. Hearing these claims and seeing Russians' desperation to get Alaska back leads us right into the question of how they lost it in the first place. It wasn't through a war or conquest, but a good old-fashioned sale more than 150 years ago. To get why they let it go, we have to look at Russia's time in Alaska before that deal. Their presence there started in the late 1700s when explorers and traders crossed the Bering Strait looking for new opportunities. The main draw was the fur trade. You see, sea otters, foxes, and seals had thick pelts that fetched high prices in Europe and China. Russian companies set up posts along the coast, hunting these animals and shipping the furs back home. It was a booming business at first, with thousands of pelts exported each year. Whaling came later as ships hunted whales for oil and bone, adding to the profits. Despite this business venture, Alaska was not an easy place to control. The climate hit hard, with brutal winters, endless snow, and isolation that made everything tougher. Supply lines stretched thousands of miles from St. Petersburg, across Siberia, and to the Pacific Ocean. Ships took months to arrive, and many didn't make it due to storms or ice. Permanent settlements were small and scattered, mostly around places like Sitka, which became the capital of Russian America. The population never grew much. By the mid-1800s, only a few hundred Russians lived there full-time, relying on local indigenous people for labor and trade. These native groups, like the Tlingit and the Aleut, had their own societies, and relations weren't always peaceful. Conflict arose over hunting grounds and forced work, leading to uprisings that cost lives on both sides. Over time, resource extraction wore thin. The fur trade peaked early, but over-hunting depleted animal populations. Sea otters nearly vanished, cutting into earnings. Whaling faced competition from other nations, and the remote location meant high costs for everything from food to tools. Russia tried to build farms and mines, but the soil was poor, and gold hadn't been discovered in large amounts yet. Harsh terrain meant no roads or rails. Everything moved by sea or sled. Governance was loose, with company officials acting as rulers. This led to corruption and inefficiency plaguing operations. Alaska felt like a distant outpost, draining money rather than making it. The government subsidized the Russian-American company, which ran the colony, but even that couldn't keep things afloat forever. By the 1850s, reports back to the Tsar painted a grim picture. Low returns, high expenses, and growing vulnerability. Because of all these, valid concerns, Russia started seeing Alaska as a liability, not an asset that was worth holding on to. By the mid-1800s, this view set the stage for just letting it go. Russia's hold weakened as problems piled up, turning what once was a promising venture into a burden they were ready to just shed. And that's exactly what led to the sale, a move driven by cash needs, strategic shifts, and fears of loss without gain. The reasons Russia sold Alaska boil down to money troubles first. The Crimean War, fought from 1853 to 1856 against Britain, France, and others, left Russia in bad shape financially. They lost the war, and it cost them dearly. Around 500,000 soldiers died, and billions of rubles were spent. The treasury was empty, and they needed funds to rebuild the military and pay debts. Alaska's fur trade, already declining, couldn't cover its own costs, let alone help the empire. Annual maintenance ran high, with shipments of supplies alone eating up profits. Reports from the time showed that the Russian-American company was losing money year after year. The only thing that kept it running was government bailouts. Beyond that, fear played a big role. Russia worried Britain might grab Alaska in the next conflict. The two nations had clashed before, and with Britain's powerful fleet and interests in the Pacific, defending such a remote spot seemed impossible. That would make Alaska an easy target. Add to that threat the indigenous resistance adding to the strain, with battles that required troops Russia couldn't spare. Between these two violent threats, the Tsar realized that if a war came, Russia could lose the territory for nothing. Selling it made sense as a way to get something out of it before that happened. They looked at options, even considering Britain as a buyer, but tensions made that risky. Geopolitically, Russia's attention was turning elsewhere. Their empire focused on Europe, where threats from powers like Austria and Prussia loomed, and on Asia, with expansion into places like Manchuria. Alaska sat on the edge, too far to matter in those plans. It was vulnerable, with no natural defenses against invasion. Supplying troops or settlers took too long, and the population stayed tiny. Selling to the United States offered a smart twist. It could create goodwill with a rising power and pit them against Britain, which had issues with America too. Russia saw the US as a neutral friend, having supported them during the Civil War by sending ships to American ports. Maintenance costs sealed the deal. The distance from St. Petersburg, over 7,000 miles or about 11,000 kilometers, meant delays in communication and aid. Harsh weather damaged ships and outposts, requiring constant repairs. Building infrastructure like forts or harbors also costs a fortune in a land of permafrost and mountains. Governance struggled. Laws from home didn't fit local needs, and corruption among officials wasted resources. Indigenous relations required diplomacy and sometimes force, adding expenses. By 1860, the colony cost more than it brought in, with fur yields down 90% from peak levels. With this added reason, Russia decided it was time to cut their losses. With these pressures mounting, Russia opened talks for a sale. The process unfolded in ways that highlight the era's diplomacy, full of quiet negotiations and unexpected turns. The deal came together through key players on both sides. Eduard de Stockel, Russia's minister to the US, handled the talks for his country. He had lived in America for years and understood the politics. On the American side, Secretary of State William Seward drove the effort. Seward believed in expanding US territory, seeing Alaska as a step towards controlling the Pacific. Negotiations started quietly in 1867, with Stockel getting approval from Tsar Alexander II. They met late at night in Washington, hashing out terms quickly. The price settled at $7.2 million, paid in gold. That worked out to about 2 cents per acre for almost 587,000 square miles. Russia accepted because, well, they needed the cash fast, and the US agreed, seeing potential in resources and location. The treaty itself had what you would call some odd features. It was written in French and English, skipping Russian entirely. This followed diplomatic habits of the time, where French served as the language of international agreements. It showed how global the deal was, not just between the two nations. The document outlined borders, transferred rights, and protected residents' choices to stay or leave. Signing happened on March 30th, 1867, and the US Senate ratified it soon after. Transfer ceremonies took place in Sitka that October, with Russian flags lowered and American ones raised. What's really interesting is how public views at the time differed sharply. In the US, many mocked the purchase as Seward's folly, calling Alaska a worthless icebox. Newspapers ran cartoons showing polar bears and frozen wastelands, arguing the money could go to better uses, like rebuilding after the Civil War. Critics said it was a barren land with no real value, ignoring hints of minerals or fish. Support came from those who saw strategic benefits, like blocking British expansion in North America. However, over time, opinions shifted as discoveries proved them wrong. In Russia, the sale got little attention. The government kept it low-key, avoiding debates that might stir opposition. Most people focused on internal reforms, like ending serfdom, and they didn't care much about a far-off colony. Some officials regretted it later, but at the moment it seemed practical. The money helped pay debts and fund railroads in Europe. With the deal done, Alaska became American. But its true worth would emerge in ways neither side would have predicted back then. At the time of the sale, Alaska may have seemed like a minor acquisition, a frozen wilderness with little to offer, but under US control, the territory underwent a dramatic transformation. What began as a quiet addition to the American map soon revealed itself as a powerhouse of natural wealth and strategic value. The first major turning point came with the discovery of gold. In the 1890s, the Klondike gold rush captured global attention, drawing tens of thousands of prospectors to the Yukon region. Although much of the frenzy unfolded in neighboring Canada, Alaska was far from left out. Strikes in places like Nome, Fairbanks, and Juneau sparked a wave of migration and settlement. By 1900, Alaska's gold output had reached millions of dollars annually, far surpassing the original $7.2 million purchase price. Entire towns sprang up almost overnight, and the population surged from just a few thousand to over 60,000 by 1910. This boom didn't just bring wealth, it laid the foundation for lasting infrastructure. Roads, ports, and railways were built to support the growing economy. All these were developments that Russia had never managed during its colonial tenure. Shortly after, the discovery of oil would prove even more transformative. In the 1960s, massive reserves were found at Prudhoe Bay on Alaska's North Slope. This triggered one of the most ambitious engineering projects in American history, the construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. Completed in 1977, this pipeline stretched over 800 miles, carrying up to 2 million barrels of oil per day from the Arctic to the southern port of Valdez. Oil quickly eclipsed gold in both scale and impact. Today, in 2025, Alaska continues to produce around 500,000 barrels of oil daily. While this is down from its peak, it remains a vital contributor to both the state and national economy. With Alaska North Slope crude averaging around $70 per barrel, the revenues added up quickly. The state's permanent fund, built from oil royalties, pays annual dividends to residents, over $1,000 per person in 2024 alone. When adjusted for inflation and cumulative value, Alaska's oil wealth since the sale easily reaches into the trillions of dollars. These discoveries didn't just enrich Alaska, they redefined its place in the world. What was once dismissed as a useless outpost became a cornerstone of American energy independence and economic strength. For Russia, watching this transformation unfold has been a sobering reminder of the immense value that it gave up. But that's not all. Alaska's strategic importance has steadily increased, especially during key moments in global conflicts. During World War II, the territory became a critical military outpost. The Aleutian Islands, which stretch far into the Pacific, were the site of direct combat between American and Japanese forces. These were the only battles fought on U.S. soil during the war. In response, the U.S. military rapidly constructed airfields, naval bases, and supply routes across Alaska. Many of these installations remain operational today and continue to play a vital role in national defense. Following World War II, Alaska's relevance only grew. During the Cold War, its proximity to the Soviet Union positioned it as a front line of surveillance and deterrence. The state became a hub for early warning radar systems, including the Distant Early Warning Line, which was designed to detect incoming Soviet bombers and missiles. Missile silos and air defense systems were deployed throughout the region. This has reinforced Alaska's role as a shield against potential attacks from across the Bering Strait. In recent years, Alaska's strategic value has evolved once again. Climate change and shifting Arctic geopolitics have brought new opportunities and challenges. As Arctic ice continues to melt, previously inaccessible shipping lanes are opening through the Northwest Passage and the Northern Sea Route. These new maritime corridors dramatically shorten transit time between Asia, Europe, and North America. Alaska's location places it at the crossroads of these emerging trade routes, giving the United States a logistical and economic advantage in Arctic commerce. In addition to its economic and geopolitical significance, Alaska remains a cornerstone of American military strategy. The state hosts several major installations, including Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson and Eielson Air Force Base. These facilities house thousands of personnel and advanced aircraft. This contributes not only to national security, but also to the local economy through jobs, infrastructure, and federal investment. Still, Alaska's economic prosperity isn't limited to oil and gold. Over the decades, a diverse range of industries have taken root, turning the state into a dynamic economic engine. One of the most enduring pillars is the fishing industry. Alaska's waters teem with salmon, halibut, and crab, supporting thousands of jobs and sustaining coastal communities. While recent years have brought challenges from shifting global markets to increased competition, the sector remains vital to the state's identity and economy. Mining has also expanded far beyond its gold rush origins. Today, Alaska is a leading source of zinc and other valuable minerals. This includes rare earth elements that are critical for modern technologies. These resources not only diversify the state's economy, but also position it as a key player in the global supply chain. Mining towns, once built around gold, now thrive on a broader portfolio of extraction and export. Tourism also adds another layer to Alaska's economic story. Each year, millions of visitors arrive to experience its vast wilderness, towering glaciers, and unique wildlife. Cruise ships dock in its beautiful ports, and small businesses, from lodges to local artisans, benefit from the seasonal influx. For many Alaskans, tourism is more than an income stream, it's a celebration of the land's natural beauty and cultural heritage. Federal investment plays a crucial role as well. Government spending on infrastructure, defense, and public services helps stabilize the economy, especially in remote areas. In some years, this support has even outpaced oil revenues, underscoring Alaska's strategic importance to the nation. All of these sectors contribute to a broader transformation. What was once dismissed as a distant outpost has become a thriving, multifaceted economy. Alaska now ranks as one of the top states in per capita income, a far cry from its humble beginnings. This evolution from frozen frontier to economic powerhouse has not gone unnoticed. Alaska's transformation from a frozen outpost to a strategic powerhouse continues to haunt Russia. Nationalists point to its vast resources and military significance as proof that the 1867 sale was a historic blunder. Media outlets revisit old maps, glorify Russian explorers, and stir up nostalgia for a time when the empire stretched across the Pacific. Online forums buzz with memes and debates, especially during moments of tension with the West. But beneath the humor and symbolism lies a deeper frustration. For some Russians, Alaska represents more than lost land. It's a reminder of lost influence. The territory they sold for a modest sum now fuels American strength, both economically and militarily. And that contrast stings. Still, nostalgia doesn't change reality. The idea of reclaiming Alaska isn't just far-fetched, it's politically and militarily impossible, as we've already discussed. Russia knows that Alaska is truly gone. There is no serious plan, no official policy, and no realistic path forward. These calls to reclaim Alaska serve a different purpose. They stir national pride, distract from the current economic hardship in the nation. They offer a fantasy of restored greatness in a time of internal strain. In the end, Alaska's story is a lesson in strategic foresight. Russia saw a drain. America saw potential. What was once dismissed as expendable became indispensable. The land, sold for pennies, now anchors U.S. power in the Arctic, fuels its economy, and strengthens its global reach. And for Russia, that deal is irreversible. What is sold stays sold. What's lost becomes legend. And what's defended by the United States? It stays American, baby. Thanks for watching.